There you go.
Gary, can you hear us?
I can now, thank you.
Okay, great. Now, unfortunately, we have an echo, which is really annoying.
You just mute that laptop, probably.
Well, I don't know if I can mute it without muting.
No, I think just on the itself.
Matt's got it.
We go through this almost.
Nope.
Hello. Okay, I need to turn something off.
Chris.
Let's see.
It might just be that we have two of these microphones.
Yeah.
They're both
Could you
feeding
take a look at this and see if
We can turn this one on.
the computer that we're
Yes.
doing the meeting with.
Yes.
So maybe we can just mute that one, or is that just a screen for this? It's just.
I think it's just a screen. Matt, can that computer be muted?
I think you're right. It's probably the microphone.
It's also probably that this is really close. Oh, it's delayed.
Yeah.
Welcome to the show. Yeah.
We just time, but it might. We also have two. We just unplug that one.
I just did.
And we're still
That
back on.
Or wait, is there sound?
Yeah, that's on.
I have no idea.
I'm glad this is all streaming out.
Yep.
Wait.
Yeah.
So where's my voice coming from right now?
everywhere.
But it's
There's a speaker.
yeah, I feel like it's coming from back there is the problem.
Can we turn the volume on this laptop down?
What about on the monitor?
When I try to do that, it says it's a 0. I tried to. Say something around.
Gianna, how did you turn that one off?
Push the
The power button.
Monitor. Yeah, see, this one has green light.
Wait, okay.
That one just
I feel like, are we working now?
Gary, can you hear us?
I got you. No echo.
Wow.
There we
All
go.
right. I don't
Wait.
know.
We did the volume on that laptop.
Yes, but I just heard not there.
Yeah, there's a speaker playing here. I don't know.
Oh yeah, I think that's the problem. Yeah. Okay. Close the
But it is.
that one.
Okay.
There we go.
With the
I gotta make
live
sure the
feed was
YouTube
playing
stream
back
is
through
not
Yes.
streaming
and
to
get
this.
picked up
as
by
well.
this
Got it.
microphone.
Your reelection is guaranteed. Okay,
Holy cows.
Gary, we are ready for you on the tree removal request.
Okay. Got a little bit of tree business for y'all. Thank you for coming tonight. I'd like to talk a little bit about other business real quick in the tree board world. As you all know, we are a Tree City, USA. Congratulations to us. It is our 29th year. We've been selected to be a Tree City. We have two Arbor Day events this year. The first one is April 21st. That's our annual tree giveaway with the third graders from Philomath Elementary and the Kings Valley kindergartners. At that event, we have about 150 or so trees. We talk a little bit about tree planting, give them an opportunity to get a tree, take it home and plant in their yards. These are all street approved trees, so we don't give out fruit bearing trees, stuff like that. I think there's some maples. I can't remember. Elijah, our city arborist, he picks out the selection. They're little seedlings. It's a great event to see the smiling kids. We missed it for a couple years with the COVID, but we got back into it last year. So we're looking forward to that. And then on April 28th, it's a community event. Be at the Paul Skirvin Park. Working with the Rotary Club and the rodeo folks. We're going to plant 2 trees. I don't know if you know this Paul Skirvin Park. They got a fence around the giant horseshoe or the horse. We're going to plant 2 trees back there. The mayor will read the proclamation, or a representative will read it, I should say. And then we'll get a chance to put 2 trees in the ground and wish them well. So that's on April 28th. I believe the time on that is 10:30. If I hear differently, I'll let you all know. So any questions about Arbor Day events coming up?
Yeah, what kind of trees are going to be planted at the Skirvin Park?
You know, I helped with selection. Elijah and I did, and I'm not sure exactly what the the Rotary Club decided. We gave them a couple. These are 2 good trees, and I'm not sure exactly what they picked out at the end. So,
Just so you know, Gary, in the newsletter that is emailed out, I think it says 11 o'clock for the start time.
oh, okay. I know it's been bouncing around, so it might be 11.
Thank you, Gary.
All right. So in your packets, there's a tree removal quest at 236 Maple Street. Those are 2 street trees. I'm sure nobody that worked for Public Works planted those because they are way old. But we own them because they are street trees. There's a letter from the homeowners why they would like for them to be taken out in your packets. There's also an AIS from Public Works Department, myself, on our recommendation, the Public Works recommendation. I did send Lige out to evaluate it. You'll see the tree risk assessment forms done on them. Elijah and I spoke for quite a substantial time on those 2. Our recommendation is they don't come out. There could be some tree pruning could be done on them, but our recommendation is the trees stay and be pruned back.
Gary, would you be kind enough to, well, I have one question, and then I wonder if you'd walk us through these risk assessment forms.
Okay.
It wasn't entirely clear to me what the assessment here was, but I assumed that the cost to remove or trim the trees would be paid by the city. Is that correct?
In this case, yes.
Okay.
I have a question too, Gary.
Yes, sir.
Looks like there's also a form here for the big tree in front of Northgate Auto or whatever that, yeah. Was that,
Oh, hold on a minute. That might have been an error.
okay,
That is a different tree issue. So yeah, we just want to deal with the 236 maple. Sorry about that.
no worries. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing.
No, that tree does need to come out. It is dead.
Yeah,
So it has to come out. We're waiting for the street project to be out of the way because it's right. They're right there in that area right now. And if we go in there and start trying to deal with those trees, that tree, it might be, we might be in somebody's way. So.
Okay.
When will we be talking about that tree at the next meeting?
There's nothing, honestly, Gianna, it's a hazard tree at this point. It's once they're deemed dead and they're a hazard, it's no longer, I don't want to sound trash or anything, but it's no longer a tree board issue. It's an evaluation that we have to make.
For here? Wouldn't it make sense to just go over?
Well, I mean, we can talk about it, but it's a tree that's going to have to come out because it's dead. So,
Right.
we can more than welcome to talk about it if you like. I don't know what we would talk about because, I mean, the tree board is designed to give recommendations on whether a tree should be, saved or not. In this case, it's at a point where it needs to be taken out because of hazard issues. So, Ruth, you had a question about the tree risk assessment form?
Yes, I wonder if you could just clarify. There are parts that address defects and conditions affecting the likelihood of failure. Crown and branches, trunk roots, and root collar. This is my first experience looking at a tree assessment form. So,
I will tell you that I am not a tree assessment form guy. There is a lot of specialized training that goes into learning how to fill out these forms. And I don't know if I want to try to ruin it and make it. I don't know enough about it to talk about them, Ruth. I know that when Elijah and I meet together after he does the form, we go over each category and we talk about it. And at the end, I let him make the final assessment on it.
okay,
Because he has been certified at it.
If you'd like.
I would love that.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I can speak to it just for a little bit. This is a form that's put together by the International Society of Arboriculture to help arborists do tree assessments. And it is trying to accomplish two things. First of all, it's trying to identify specific parts of a tree that could be a hazard. So in order to do that, you have to have a tree defect of some kind, like a broken branch or a dead branch or something of that nature. And then you have to have targets around it have value that could be damaged by that. And so one thing the form is trying to accomplish is identifying specific defects within a tree and the likelihood and the significance of if it were to hit a target, what would be the consequences of that. And so the first half of the form is basically like a health assessment of the tree, kind of just overall. And then the second page, it looks like it's just the 2 pages, yeah, because it's a front and back form. So the first half of the second page is still addressing those individual parts of the tree. And then the form, that table there with all the X's in it, that is basically adding up all of those different things happening within the tree that then help that create like a comprehensive risk assessment for the whole tree.
Okay,
And so without getting into too much detail, there's this little grid in the middle section of the second page that basically helps you determine, is this a high risk tree? Is it extreme hazard, high hazard, moderate hazard, or low hazard tree overall? And then the last section is basically giving some recommendations for, is there something you can do about this situation to reduce the hazard level of the tree? And so what Lige did with this is he went through and identified specific things in both of these trees, determined how big of an issue those are, and if there's anything that can be done to mitigate those hazards. And for both of these trees, the residual risk came out as low for both the trees.
okay. So when you speak of the residual risk, I assume you mean the risk of the tree dying?
No, the risk of a part of a tree causing damage, either to property or to people.
Okay,
So there's the risk rating that this form gives you, which is that extreme, high, moderate, or low. And then, so that there's an initial rating, and then there's a recommendation for mitigation options. And then a residual rating is, after you've done those things, what's the final risk level of this tree?
okay,
And so for this form in both of these trees, the original risk rating was low. And then with the mitigation options of whatever Lige has recommended here, the residual rating is also low, which is the lowest.
okay. So for the first tree, he cites the crown is unbalanced, I believe.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? Does that mean what it sounds like?
It is just a characteristic of the tree. So none of the things there that are mentioned are necessarily an issue. It's just a condition that's noted in the tree. And then you're taking that condition and then you're adding a likelihood of failure of that condition. Like, how likely is it that this tree is going to fall over because it has an unbalanced canopy? And if it does fall over, what are the consequences? How likely will it hit something? What are the consequences of that? And all of those things are added together to give that final risk rating of the tree. So when Lige did this, he noted that he determined that even though the crown is unbalanced, that doesn't pose a significant hazard for this. And it came out as a low risk, even though that condition is noted.
Okay. And he also notes asphalt and concrete over roots. But it seems to indicate that's not really an issue.
There is a little bit of sidewalk there that it's where that house is. It's on the corner of Cedar and 19th Street, and the sidewalk dead ends, and right where that is, it has raised the sidewalk a little bit. It doesn't go anywhere. It just stops right at the tree. So it's right there. And Lige and I did talk about that as a potential issue. If that sidewalk ever got pushed down the street, down Maple Street, those trees would definitely be an issue at that point, but there's no plan on curb and gutter and a sidewalk in Maple at this point. If that were to happen, then we would have to definitely reevaluate those trees, because I think they would be a sidewalk issue. Right now, they're not, because the sidewalk basically just stops right there in front of their house.
Okay. Now for this second tree, he seems to recommend trimming.
Yeah, there was some stuff that's either they're not on the house, but they definitely are close to the house. And there was some branches close to the power lines. We are not certified to work in the power lines, so that portion we would have to contract out. I'm sure Graham could attest to that. You have to be a certified line guy or whatever it is that does that works in the trees. We can't do that. We can trim everything else, but anything that's And I don't know the exact distance. Graham might know the exact distance. You have to be away from the power lines.
At least 10 feet away from them. Anything within that 10 feet area of the distribution lines, you have to be a utility line clearance specialist to work on that. And for the most part, Pacific Power maintains those pretty regularly. So, it is, when I looked at it, it didn't seem like there was anything from the city's standpoint that needed to be addressed for the line clearance portion. But if there is, the proper procedure is to tell Pacific Power, hey, we have a tree here that is an issue, and they'll send an assessor to come out and determine whether it's something that they think is a priority.
Okay.
We have had the garbage company asked a few times that those tree branches be trimmed because they come around that corner, and their trucks seem to be taller now for some strange reason. So they've asked if they could trim, we could trim those trees up as well.
Okay. So it sounds like you're in agreement with trimming at least one of the trees.
And if the other one needs something, I think we would do that while we're there. I mean,
Okay.
I think you want to try, I mean, and I'm not an expert by any means, but I don't think you want to take up one and not trim up the other because of I don't know, the overall effect of both trees. So I think we would trim up both of them accordingly.
Okay.
Question?
Yes.
So if I'm understanding this right, this assessment is mostly about safety. I just wondered if you had responses to the concerns that were raised in the letter. Like it feels like there's a lot of other issues beyond just pure like structural safety that they were bringing up.
I believe that to be true as well. I think when I met with Patricia, we talked about just the issues with debris getting in her yard. I mean, we have to take those into consideration as well, but I don't think they, when you do the tree risk assessment, I don't think they warrant it raising it to from a low to a moderate to a high to extreme. I think those are basically, that was part of the reason why Elijah and I talked about trimming it up. Maybe we'll help alleviate some of those issues. It's not going to, the only way we're going to get rid of all the pine needles is to get rid of the 2 trees. Unfortunately, I don't think that is something we're ever going to, the homeowner wants them out because of that big issue. But I don't know if we could ever meet her requests on that.
Okay. Are you the homeowners? Did you wish to comment on this? I know we've all reviewed the letter and the photographs that you provided. Did you have any additional comments?
Yeah, my big thing is if the situation was in reverse where our trees were causing this kind of havoc on the city, I'm pretty sure they would be probably sitting where we are questioning, why are your trees damaging our property, and you need to take care of those things. The gutters are constantly filled with those. I have no vegetation, I have no area to plant because those trees are right there and they just constantly fall down. They're very acidic, they kill everything. I have to move everything out of there. That stuff falls down. We're always, because we're afraid somebody's going to slip and fall on the sidewalk. Kevin's out there constantly cleaning up, and then you get the big trucks coming through and they smash down all of those tiny pine cones, and they're just a mess. Again, a slipping hazard. They're just annoying. They're just not at all conducive to anything positive in our lives. And we've been there for 32 years and we put up with them this long, and you can just see, like they were saying about the crown is kind of wonky, and eventually they will probably come out of, like Gary says, that they have to redo the sidewalks. We have had the city fortunately have to remove one of them because it was leaning down and coming towards the neighbor's property. But again, if we had a personal artifact of anything that was bothering the city, we would be liable. So it is damaging our gutters. It is a constant headache. So for us, it just doesn't seem like for 32 years it's feasible that we keep having to put up with those trees.
Mhm.
We never, commission years, never thought anything about them. They were there, we kind of deal with them and stuff like this. But, yeah, they are getting bigger and more out of control. I try my best to keep up with it, and they do put a lot of debris into the road, and I will only go so far out there to clean it up. You know, I'll try to keep the sidewalk clean, and sometimes I'll have to weekly, certain times of the year, try to make it safe for anything. But, you know, I kind of hope that the street sweeper would come in and kind of get them, but they kind of just almost go around it, you know, because if they kind of tilt it in, they would at least grab someone and get it on the sidewalk. But, you know, so there's only so much I can do, and it's getting more and more dangerous for me to go out there. I used to keep them trimmed, trying to keep them out of the garbage trucks and stuff, but the bays are higher up now. They're kind of leaning down. It's harder for me. I can't really go out there in the street anymore and do it, and things like that. So we got to the point where it just seemed like it seemed practical to me to have them removed, because at some point they will have to be removed. I think, I don't know if they realize that or not, but in the streets, or they will end up being so front heavy that they'll start tipping like some of the trees did before. They do grow fairly fast. So once that one tree was moved, the other one just kind of took off. And the power company came in, I guess, and just shaved one side of the tree, the east tree, to get it out of the power lines. They basically shoot for the ones that are above equal to and above the power line, but the ones below the power lines are actually starting to turn up to go up too, and they're about ready to touch stuff like this. And I think that gives kind of a weird, from a distance, of a problem, that particular tree. And I don't know if that's weakened it or not. Snap or anything like that. But I just assume that, you know, it's going to cost the maintain for every power, let's say, keep the trip back and keep it maintained and stuff like this. It's not going to be any cost to me this effort. But eventually they'll have to remove it because they're going to cost me much more by then. We'll see if that's the intent to do it or something.
I want to be able to plant stuff. I want things out there, and I can't. It's 30-some years of not being able to plant things and enjoy my yard. It's just unfeasible, because if we did that to you guys would be like, no, get your tree out. We're wanting to plant shrubs and, you know, vegetation, anything nice. We can't do that. I put up, you guys, that it's backbreaking at times when I'm out there lifting and shoveling all of those pine needles. They're heavy, and we have to fill up our reciprocal constantly. Now, if that's your guys' trees, then why don't y'all maintain them yourselves then? Get them off the property and stuff, and out of the road and things where we're not going so liable. I mean, it's a ton of pine cones and needles and things that's hard to manage.
Gary, let me ask you a question.
Yes.
Is this a variety of tree that is, you mentioned it was planted before you guys were here. Is this a variety that is currently on the approved tree list?
I don't believe we would plant a tree of that nature in that area because it is a large tree. I don't know if that exact brand or species of tree is on the list, or I don't think it is, but we wouldn't plant a tree of that size in that area. And I will agree with the homeowners. I mean, if it was right next to my house and I was dealing with it, it would be frustrating. Because that is definitely not a street tree, just because it's so big, and it does cause it will eventually cause a lot of havoc to somebody.
If the trees were to be removed, would they be replaced with another type of tree?
That's an option. Yeah, that's definitely an option for sure.
I mean, is the city required to have a tree in that location? I guess that's what I'm asking.
No, but we try to maintain a street canopy. I believe our number is 46%, something like that, Kevin. I think so. We're trying to keep a canopy in the city. Taking out those 2 large trees would definitely reduce that canopy by a number.
I'd like to hear any other comments from other tree boarders, tree board members.
I have a couple thoughts. First of all, just reading through the letter that was put together for this, I definitely feel for the homeowners that, like, it's a lot of work to maintain. It's a lot of work to clean up. They can be really messy trees, especially at certain times of the year. And there's really, that is always the cost benefit of having a large tree on your property. If you have a mature tree, it's going to generate a lot of mess, and that's a lot of responsibility, whether the trunk is on your property or not. At some point, that tree comes on your property and you've got mess to deal with. And so, when you're talking about removing a tree for those reasons, you have to wait, ask yourself, like, what value is this tree contributing? And is that, in this case, it's the city's tree. So the city needs to decide, like, is there enough value in this tree to deal with the added strain for property owners adjacent to the tree and for whatever maintenance costs the city has. Like, you're always weighing those two things. And a lot of the things, there are things in this letter that are things that can be mitigated. The pruning for clearance on the house, which I think is absolutely legitimate. And for the street clearance and all those things, I think that those, if the trees do stay, those are important things to do, because I would like to try to address as many of these as possible, but from a tree risk standpoint, issues with trees are divided up into what is considered an actual safety risk and what is considered a nuisance. And the flowers or the cones falling on the ground and clogging gutters and that sort of stuff, that is in the nuisance category for tree risk assessment. And so it's not really considered a hazard, even though, yes, it can cause property damage if the gutters aren't cleaned. And yes, you can slip, and there are those issues, but those things, because there's not a tree mitigation thing short of removing the tree to do anything about that, they're considered nuisance issues rather than safety issues generally. One of the things that Lige did recommend in his report is that they be inspected
Annually.
yearly. That's what I was just misreading it. So he did recommend that they be looked at about once a year to make sure that there aren't any developing issues with them or safety concerns. And I think it is possible that they could be an issue down the road, even if there's a sidewalk that gets extended through there. I don't think that means that the trees necessarily have to be removed for that. There are other options you can do to have a walkway around a mature tree. So I personally think that the combination of an annual inspection interval for these trees and the fact that a lot of the actual safety issues with them can be mitigated through pruning, I'm definitely in favor of trying to keep the trees, at least in the short term.
Okay, Gianna, may I ask what your thoughts are?
Similarly, I also live in a house with 2 big trees in my front yard, they're walnut trees, and they dump unbelievable amount of everything. It's a huge amount of work, so I'm very sympathetic to that. I also recognize, though, that those trees were there when we bought the house. We knew that there were huge trees on that property when we bought it, and I kind of feel like those trees also keep our house shaded. And when I went to look at these, that was my first thought, is, if these trees were to come down, these people's home would get much, much hotter in the summer, given that they are in the south. That's a factor to consider, because it does, in that aspect, when you ask, these things don't do anything for us, that's something they are doing for you. They are keeping your home cooler. I could deal with it.
I don't think there's anything that we can say that would make you like these trees.
When we moved there, they weren't. We've been there for 33 years.
Right.
The pug likes them. friends likes it because it's a nice shady area.
Exactly.
Question.
Yeah, like basically like.
I'm curious about what the city's liability is for like falling hazards and things like that. Particularly in the street is a big concern, but, and I don't know how many kids walk down that road to go back and forth to school, but it is basically across the street from the schools also. So I'm just curious what, in general, what the city's liability situation is with street trees.
Can you comment?
Yeah, unless we've got a documented case of a slip hazard, trip hazard, something like that, it's pretty minimal. If you're looking at a raised sidewalk, typically that's going to be to the adjacent property owner. On a street tree, that would, the city's going to maintain as far as trim it up, but as far as the leaf control and all that, that's the adjacent property owner as well. So, could somebody trip on a pine cone in front of their house on the sidewalk and sue the city and sue the property owner? They could. How liable is that? I mean, you can sue for anything, but I think we've got some protection. It's open space. We're not charging money for somebody to be on that spot, right? And so it's elective whether they walk on that area or they don't walk on that area. And so there's always an exposure to get sued, but as far as actual liability, without being an attorney, pretty minimal.
So they're not the big pine cones, they're those annoying little ones, and they just,
They absorb water, they get punchy and slimy.
Right.
slimy, very, very slippery. I mean, I've slipped out there several times on it, so, and it's on 19th, so you get all of that kids traffic through there.
No, I'm with you. I'd have written the same letter, submitted it. So.
Is there an interval for cleaning the streets as far as the street sweeping and that sort of thing?
Gary can answer that best.
Yeah, we sweep at least once a week. And we get about 60% of the town done per week. When it's real leafy season, when leaves are down, we'll try to sweep 2, sometimes 3 times a week, just so we can keep up with it. Where that house is, we won't sweep down that street because it's a chip seal street. I will talk to the guys about coming around that corner. I didn't realize they weren't hitting on that corner, but I can talk to them about coming around that corner as far as they can before they get onto the chip seal. Chip seals and sweepers, they don't really work that well together. They seem to tear up the chip seal. I mean, it can be done, but you just have to take the brooms off, or not run the brooms and just run the vacuum. So I will talk to the guys about making sure if the trees stay, I will tell them to start, sweeping up around the corner and stuff like that.
That seems like one way that we could hit a lot of the issues with this, as far as at least the street component, that the homeowner doesn't really want to or feel comfortable cleaning the street. So if that's not already happening, I feel like that could be an easy mitigation.
How much of the year do these trees drop those cones?
Did you have a question? And
Oh, no, you're good. I can talk later.
They're actually flowers. They're like male
I'm sorry.
pollen cones that drop. So it is different than the normal leaf season. So it's probably dropping when it's not the leaf collection time or the high activity for the street sweeper. So I believe with Lebanese cedar or Atlas cedar, whatever this one is, it is kind of a spring and summer thing, because those cones are made in the spring, and then once they're finished, they all fall off. So I don't know exactly what month that is around here, but it's not fall.
It usually takes me 9 months out of the year. Something's falling basically 9 months out of the year. It's the pine needles are all summer long, and then it turns into the cones and stuff. It's right now where it's kind of, you think they're dropping, but not. But the pine needles will start picking up again here.
Did you have a question?
I had a thought.
Thoughts?
Sorry, I don't know why I just looked directly at it.
That works.
I guess I just feel like we should get rid of these trees. That I don't really like. They're beautiful trees. They have a lot of problems. They're going to take a lot of work to maintain that it feels like the city is not fully doing right now. They're going to keep growing up into the power lines. They're going to have to keep trimming them off of there. We can't apparently sweep the street that they're on, so it's not your problem. That they don't own the street. It's not their problem to clear our own damn streets. So I guess I don't really see the point in having these trees. They're not trees we would plant now. They're making a huge mess. We can plant other trees there that we would plant now on our streets with our current street tree list. So I guess that's kind of where I'm at. Like, they're beautiful. I wouldn't like to see them go, but I guess to me the cons outweigh the pros on that. But I'm happy to hear any other points of view.
Well, I think we have basically two options. One is to take them out and, if appropriate, replace them with approved trees. The other option being to have them trimmed up, maybe revisited in a year, see if it's helped or not. But it is obviously creating a burden for the homeowners.
And I understand your point about the hazard versus the nuisance. I personally feel like you should be able to live in Philomath without nuisances. And I feel like that is our job. And I know we can't always get rid of every nuisance, but I feel like we can get rid of this nuisance relatively easily.
So just based on the hour, we're at 7:48, so I'd recommend getting a motion on the table and seeing if there's a second and moving through. I think we've discussed this in its entirety, and if there's more comments, we can go there, but I think we get a motion on the table.
Matt?
I was holding out. I was hoping the pug would come, but yeah, I move that we remove the trees
And replace them.
and replace them with suitable.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that motion.
Okay.
If there's any further comments.
Thank you. Any further comments before we take a vote? All
I
right.
have one brief comment.
Yes.
Whenever you have mature trees, you will always have some amount of nuisance and some amount of maintenance for them. And for me, the question with these trees is, are we willing to put in effort to have large trees in Philomath? Or, like, we've had many large trees in this town and had many of them cut down because they're inconvenient for one reason or another. And I'm hoping that we can put some energy and some money into trying to preserve larger trees and maintain them where possible. And maybe this is the situation to do that, maybe it's not. But as a whole, I think that whenever we have a city-owned tree that is next to a private residence, this issue is going to come up, and we have to find some way of dealing with that is not just cutting the tree down and putting a baby tree in its place.
Okay. Your point is well taken. And I think it would be advisable when we put in trees too, because I believe to maintain our tree city status, we have to put in more trees than we take out.
That's correct.
So when we do put in a tree, I think it would be worthwhile to notify the homeowner that, hey, this is the variety, it's going to grow, these are potential issues. So you know what you're getting into and understand that we have approved certain trees. We don't just put in any tree. But it seems to me that it would be appropriate to communicate that to the homeowner. Okay, with that in mind, all who are in favor of the motion, please raise your hands and say aye.
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 All opposed? Nay. Okay, with mixed feelings, the motion passes 3-2. Thank you for approaching us, and
Thank you so much. It's been our pleasure to have you guys on the council and everything too.
well, we can't always do what our constituents would like us to do, believe me. But thank you.
Thank you.
I need some more, I need a little more guidance.
Okay.
When is my time frame to get these trees out?
When can you get them out?
Well, our current budget of street budget trees is in the negative because I had to take out 3 large trees last year. Can we wait until after July 1?
Yes.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah, just put them on the list.
Okay.
we'll put some money in the budget and
Yeah, we're 3,000 in the hole, I believe Kevin told me, on street trees, so.
all right, we'll start.
Okay.
We'll dig more into the park budget or something.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you all.
No new teeter totters. Huh?
Okay. With that, I do have one additional item I'd like to wrap up. There was distributed to all of you some additional information on the black cottonwood tree. Both Eric and John were in agreement that it should be nominated as a heritage tree and that we don't need to pursue the boring, which would have an additional cost of $300,000. And really isn't necessary given the location of that particular tree. So I would like to ask first if there are any other questions or discussion on the issue.
How much was the cost of the boring?
The difference was $300,000.
Wow.
A little bit.
In the wrong profession.
You don't want to be.
All right.
I would just like to say that given the information in that email, it does look like the pipe that we put in is well outside of the critical root zone for that tree. I think in the last meeting, what it was stated is it was 30 feet away from it, and it looks like it's 130 feet away. So maybe it was just a small error there, but it seems like as long as there isn't vehicle traffic significantly closer to the tree than that during construction, there shouldn't be any issues.
Yes. And I believe it was Eric agreed with that as well. Other questions?
Oh,
yeah.
Yes, Gianna.
It sounds like it will be it should be just out of that sort of danger zone. My understanding is that when there is construction around a tree like that there are mitigations that can be made during construction to ensure that which Graham knows about, can those concerns be conveyed to the contractors so that those mitigations are taken? Because I mean, even without digging 130 feet to it, you can still.
Yeah, Kevin can speak to that, but there's a whole tree line there, right? So that will all be marked off and kept and protected and noted as a tree area. So that'll be part of the bid package when that goes out. No, in addition to access and working hours, and there's a whole list of things, but the vegetation protection will be a big part of it, especially those bigger trees.
Okay. Yes.
Well, we're still talking about that. I did talk to Mark Barnes today, and he said he would be happy to have his drone guy during the summer come out and take some pictures of the trees.
Go on.
What's that?
I can also do that.
Oh, we didn't know you were a drone guy.
I can do that.
He'll be busy on some committee somewhere.
Yeah, well,
As long as it's after 7.
7:10 apparently.
All right. All those in favor of approving the black cottonwood as a heritage tree, please raise your hands and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion passes unanimously. And with that, we will move on to our public works business.
You're welcome to stay if you want to stay, but if you need to go, then you can go as well. That's all the tree business for tonight. So
I do think we should follow up on trying to have a better plan for how to keep old, large trees. It feels like we weren't really holding up our end of the deal as far as cleaning up after that tree, but I think I'm glad we're taking those specific 2 out, but I don't want this to be a recurring problem, I guess. I just want to put that on the record.
Good point.
noted.
Maybe a bit of perspective. Light might have identified them correctly, but these are a younger version of the cedar tree that we just approved as a heritage tree in a really similar location.
Oh, the one with the strange shape.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same. I mean, they're both probably Theodore cedars, and if they're not, they're very closely related. So we have one tree that's 85 years old that has been in the way of the power lines for a long time and is over an intersection in the street and is being maintained for the sidewalk and the street, and a property owner that doesn't necessarily consider that a nuisance. And so this is a younger version of that same situation. That, if these trees were allowed to live for another 30 or 40 years, they would become that tree.
Good point.
But not every tree gets to do it. I'm glad that we have some.
Yes.
I'm glad that we're making heritage trees and protecting them.
Yes.
Don't worry, they're not protected. Thank you.
Okay,
Good night.
thank you, Gianna.
Can I sit up there with you guys?
You may, Ben, and I spoke earlier this week, and he was interested in commenting on the LID discussion.
Oh, nice.
So we will allow public comment this evening.
Is that what we're doing now? Or are we doing capital improvement?
Well, we're doing the CIP
Okay.
first, and then we'll move into the
Yeah.
LID discussion.
I'm cool with whatever.
Okay. All right. So with that, Mike, can you address the revised CIP for
I
us?
can do that. After our last meeting, Chris and I got our heads together and put together 4 new columns on each page, with the exception of the equipment and the facilities. We gathered all the total costs for the projects, and we lined those up in the first column. Then I got with Kevin, and we estimated what we're going to spend the remainder of this year. And that's the second column. That's the total expenses to date. Then we took that away from the budget, the project cost, come up with the ending budget expenses for the year. Those will roll forward into the next year. That's our new costs that we have, and the revenues are there to cover it. Speak to the projects, I can't really speak to all the projects, but that's what we built for the water, sewer, streets, and parks, and I believe even did it for the bike path, footpath. So we've done that for each one of them. We broke them out in that same sequence. So I don't know how you want to approach this particular part. We went through all the projects last time. There was the accounting that was being done in my head and then on paper. So we took it all out of my head, put it on the paper. So that's what you now see.
It's much easier to read, I will say that.
Yeah.
I appreciate that effort that went into that, for sure.
Yeah, I think it is much clearer. I don't have any specific questions, but
But I do have a couple things that Chris and I have worked on since then. And we're building the budgets now. I took what I got here and started building the budgets. I sat down with Chris last week. We've got 2 items that we're going to add to the CIP. Within the water, we're going to get a grant for Starlight Village for $120,000. So I'm going to add that to the water schedule, and for the next coming year.
where did that come from?
Is that what we're-
In the strategic plan,
Oh, you're applying for a grant?
we're looking for a grant.
You're looking for a
It
grant?
won't go forward without it, but it'll at least be on the radar.
Okay, thank you.
And that last thing I'm gonna revise on streets, the Campo allocation is that we're gonna have 250,000 available after January 1st. So that instead of 257, we'll have 250. So it's just a change of numbers.
Do you have a question on the sewer page? The first two items there, the 11th Street sewer line and the Chapel Drive force main relocate, have project balances for 23, 24, but then they don't have an associated cost in either 23, 24, 24, 25, or 25, 26.
What's going on? I can't tell you what the project is. These are balances that are sitting there that will still be working on that, but we don't have to fund them anymore. They're part of them. Numbers are up on top now. Right?
The 11th Street sewer line project isn't moving forward. We did spend some money on engineering there, and maybe that's what you're showing from total expenses to date.
Mhm.
Is some of the engineering. The Chapel Drive force main relocate. I don't know if Kevin's on there. Kevin, was the hope that that was going to happen before the end of the fiscal year?
No, the force main will not, since they have to work on the in-stream time of year, which is August through October. So that probably won't be done until sometime in that time frame.
Okay, so Mike,
11th Street, the new scope of the 11th Street, North 11th Street project will have a little bit of sewer work in it. No replacement, so it's a little bit less than what we show.
but essentially we need to carry some of that funding, show some of that funding for 23, 24.
For the 11th Street sewer line, yes.
Wouldn't, in any of the schedules, wouldn't you carry the 23-24 project balance into the 23-24 reserve column?
You really shouldn't, because that's drawing it away. It's already brought forward. It's part of the beginning balance for next year.
Yes.
That's what it'll roll into that. It's just like a regular budget. I mean, I'm looking at last year's CIP. We funded both of those. So we took the money out of the reserve last year. That's coming forward. It's going to be sitting there waiting for the project, earmarked.
So what's different between, let's just look at the force main relocate, which total project cost 250. We've already spent 35. The implication being that we're going to spend another 215,000 on that project, right?
Mm-hmm.
When are we going to spend that $215,000?
That's a Kevin question. That money sitting there, it's in,
What?
this is a reserve, and over in the budget, it's sitting there ready to go.
Yeah, I mean, right now it's a budget expense for 22, 23.
Right.
But what we just heard from Kevin is they're not going to have that done 22, 23. Right. So we probably do need to adjust that and move it over, which means we'll move it over on the reserve for an expense, but we're also going to increase the reserve because that money right now isn't carrying over into that reserve. Right. So we'll add to reserve and we'll add it in here, knowing that it's not going to happen between now and the end of this fiscal year. So we can make that adjustment. Again, what I'm hearing on both of those, both 11th Street and Chapel Drive, if we were going to get them done this year, that's what they're currently scheduled for. Talking to Kevin, neither of those are going to happen. 11th Street, they might start by then, but they're definitely not going to finish it. So I think on both of those, we just move those over to 23, 24.
It depends on where they start. They usually start in sewer, so it's possible 11th Street might.
By end of June.
We might have the expenditure out of 11th Street. Depends on when the contractor wants to get going. He's got a timeline to start anytime from May till July, I believe. So if they decide to start in July or later, they've got 75 days to finish the job. And so
do you want to leave 11th Street as it is, but just move Chapel Drive force main over?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think I'm just being confused by the project balance column. Maybe I don't fully get the last column, what that means.
I agree. I am too.
Because so like, all right, I'm looking at the engineering for South 16th Street. It says $73,000 total cost. We've already spent 50. We're expecting to spend another 23 before the end of the fiscal year. But then there's still a project balance of 23,000 because that's the total that still needs to be spent for the whole project. But then
And
I
we're gonna
see,
spend that in 23, 24.
right. But it looks like we're supposed to spend it in 22, 23. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
So the way I read it, if you go from left to right, it's just like you've said, you've got your, that third column, projected expense for the current fiscal year we're in, 22, 23. And then if there's more project to be done or more to be spent, that's what's going to show up in the 23, 24 project balance. So I would think of that as like at the start of 23, 24. So like July 1st,
Right.
23, how much of the project still needs to get done.
Right.
That should then be reflected in the 23, 24 projected expense for the
Right.
year, right? So that's where I'm saying right now that for the Chapel Drive Force Main at 215, that really should be reflected there where there's the dash. We should show the 215 there.
Got arrows, I'm moving.
Yeah, for the 11th Street line, it sounds like, I mean, right now the way this shows, either that would be 5,000 in that column as well, or we just put that total budget expense for 23, 22, 23 needs to be that full amount. I don't know, I'm a little confused on the 11th Street sewer line. Again, other than, I think a lot of that is the engineering side of it, but this is saying we're going to spend $5,000 on construction in 23, 24. But we should show that there, or just leave it off and say that we're going to spend all of that expense this year by the end of the fiscal year this year.
Yeah.
Right. So then I guess I'm still confused as to why the 23,000 for the 16th Street engineering is still populating the 23, 24 when it seems like we're planning on spending that 23,000 before the end of this fiscal year.
I think it's in there for 22, 23 as we're expecting and hoping that the engineer has time to spend that and finish the project. If he doesn't, then it will have to carry over to 23, 24, and that's where it'll be spent. So in 22, 23, if they spend 10,000 more, I would think the new project balance in 23, 24 would be 13,000. But not knowing at this point, we've got 23 that's sitting there that we don't know for sure the engineer's going to spend it. So the only number we can definitely say is at this point that is probable in 23, 24 is $23,000 because we don't know what's going to be spent yet this year. Is that right, Mike? Am I close?
Nope, you're right on.
Yeah,
So-
I'm digging everything that you're saying, Kevin. I'm picking it up. The only thing is I can't see the distinction between that $23,000 line item entry and the $5,000 line item entry for the sewer, because we're basically saying the same thing. We're probably going to spend it before the end of the year. We're not sure. One of those lines we're carrying over to the next year, and one of them we're not, and I don't know why.
We're more sure or less sure.
This is supposed to be accounting though, right? Like there's just supposed to be numbers and they add
Yeah,
up.
it's a matter of how conservative we need to budget, right? And so if there's a pretty good chance that it's going to get spent by the end of the year, we don't want to inflate next year's budget with a bunch of projects that we're going to finish this year.
Sure.
Right? At the same time, we don't want to not finish this year and not have budgeted any money next year either.
Right, so then we can't.
And so there's a
finish
bit
it.
of a staff,
Yeah.
kind of gauge here on how much certainty do we have and how much do we not. We don't want to inflate next year's budget. We don't want to under a budget as well. And on this one for $5,000, that's not going to make a break of the bank for 23. Let's go ahead and budget for next year in case.
Okay,
So it might have
but the
as much to do
215
with
not, but we are going to change that.
the 215. We're going to change.
Well, but
All you had to do was say there's some discretion in there because I wasn't under the impression that there was discretion.
there isn't an accounting.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's been over 30 years since I had that accounting class, but.
It still brings back painful memories,
Sure,
doesn't it?
sure. Yes.
My question is, and I think this is what you've been saying for the last 10 minutes, but if you have a number in the 23-24 project balance, why wouldn't that carry over into the reserves? And I think the answer is you think you're going to spend it.
We've got some confidence it'll get spent.
during that period.
And so that 5,000 actually should be there.
I'm digging it.
Okay. Any other questions?
I think this is really, really helpful. So I appreciate Mike pulling the numbers out the way he has. That's not something we've done in the past. We've always just started with this year, like next budget year, and gone forward. And I think it does give a very limited view on what's happening. Having the history of the projects leading up to it's very, very helpful. It's something that we've never done before. So there's a little bit of kinks here. Appreciate the feedback on making it so it's easy to understand for everybody, including us.
For parks, I think I know the answer. I just wanted to make sure it's accounted for the Veterans Memorial Park. It has a total project cost of $248,100, total expenses $70,000, budget expense for this year $178,100, project balance $178,100, and then projected $50,000. And I'm assuming that $50,000 is the grant from the state. It's just then that's not accounted for in the total project cost, if I'm reading that right.
So based on the previous discussion, I would assume you're confident you'll spend $178,100 in 23-24. You have the grant revenue shown for 23-24, but it's not clear that that will be spent.
See, I read it as the budgeted expense for 22-23 is the 178,100.
Right.
We don't think we're going to spend that, and so we're looking to roll that over to the 23-24 project balance.
But then we're only projecting to spend.
And then I think we do need to correct the number. I think the number that's off is the SDC number, because the $50,000 is from the grant.
Yeah.
So we definitely want that in the reserve, not in the SDC. But Mike, I think we need to increase the SDC improvement from 50,000 to the 128,100.
Oh. Gotcha.
Good catch. I mean, you could almost do without that 23-24 project balance column. But in the case where you've got multiple, project over multiple years, which most of these aren't over multiple years, but if you had one over multiple years, you'd want to see that all lined up at the kind of start of 23, what that budget number is. So, and sometimes it's not helpful. In other instances it is, so we've just left it on there for all of them.
Okay, other questions? Alrighty.
We've already got a motion to send this to the council, and we've already sent it to the council. So this was just a second look before it goes back to the council for a final review. So I don't know that we need any action taken on this.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it, Mike. I felt like there were enough questions when we did go through it with the council that wouldn't hurt to have another look. Okay. I'll read you it. Would anyone like a short break before we go on, or do you want to power through?
I want to make Van wait just a few more minutes before he gets to weigh in. Let's go. I'm ready.
Okay. Let's see. So I'm going to lead us through a discussion on infrastructure and street improvements. And as I mentioned, Van wanted to be able to comment on this in order to be equitable. If there are other members of the public who want to comment on this, I will also allow them to do so. Now, let's see. For the most part, this was motivated by our experience with North 11th Street, which is not an experience I would want to go through again, nor is it an experience I would want to ask anyone else to go through. So with that in mind, and I apologize to Gary and Kevin, you've already heard part of this once, and I'm not sure how essential it is that you or Mike stay for this. This is really our first pass at this, and before we think about taking it to council, I'd like you to think about a couple of things. One is what other questions you have, because there are a number of complex topics here. I don't have all the answers. I've talked to Chris about some of these things and talked with Jim Brewer about some. So I have some answers, but certainly not all of them. And the other is, what options for funding street improvements would you recommend to the council? So as we go through these things, if you could be thinking about those two things, as well as any other comments or questions that you have. I'm relying on both of you for your input, and Chris, because it is a complex issue without any obvious answers. And I'm sure it's an issue that every city struggles with. So my objectives here were to identify some sustainable revenue resources for street improvements so that we would not have to rely on local improvement districts, and to avoid disproportionate assessments or liens on residential homeowners. And finally, to ensure that those who develop income properties contribute proportionally to street improvements. So with that, I'm going to walk through each of the funding sources and constraints, and include some comments and opinions on them. I expect you have comments and opinions to share as well. I hope you do, because I need your input. Okay, the first funding source and the most obvious is tax revenues and general fund dollars. And generally, I think of these as already being committed to ongoing city operations to keep the city going. And as we saw 5 years ago or so, we had to increase fees in order to have enough revenue to keep the city going throughout the year. And at this point in time, we have additional staff, and our city has grown. So if there are tax revenues left over that we can use for street improvements, wonderful. I'm not counting on it. So I don't generally see that as an ongoing revenue source for street improvements, but any other thoughts you might have, I'd love to hear.
Well, I think we do set aside some of these dollars from the general fund. We put them into the different funds for maintenance and things like that. So I don't think, I mean, we are using that money for doing these types of things to some degree, but I agree with you that there's not like an excess pool of money laying around that we could be using to build streets with, just from the general fund. Agreed. Yeah.
Okay.
So I was just going to say, and I didn't know, but we used to put like 50,000 into the street fund, but it was just for maintenance. It wasn't for new stuff. So you still kind of do that.
Yes. It's probably more than 50,000, I would imagine.
Well, I mean, yeah, 20, 30 years ago, yeah.
Okay, the next item is system development charges. And these charges are funded by development or redevelopment. That is when you develop or build on a property, or when you change the use of a property. We've seen many people come in here and say, I'm not a developer. But in fact, if you have a lot and you build something, you're a developer. Even though it's not defined in our code, it could be. So these system development charges are used for system expansion and not maintenance. And to me, I find this very appealing. It's very practical because you don't want to have to rely on growth to maintain your city. You're not going to be growing all the time. We're certainly growing. But, and as we know, these funds are allocated to water and wastewater, stormwater, transportation, and parks funds, and cannot be moved from one to the other. Yes.
So just to make sure I'm understanding this right, hypothetically, if I bought a lot that had a house on it, and I tear down the house and build a new house, would I be charged SDCs?
No, you get credit for what's there already.
Okay, so as long as there's no more, as long as I'm not,
Really?
Correct.
okay, so as long as I'm not like expanding the water main or anything like that, then I'm
Or
fine.
tapping into it.
Okay, okay,
Yeah, if you had a single family home and you tore it down and built a duplex, you would get credit for one, but you would pay for the second unit's worth of SDCs. But you do get credit for the one that was there.
okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
So yeah, if you can find a lot with an old house that needs torn down, that saves you about $29,000 worth of SDCs right off the top.
Good. Now, if you put in a lot that has an old house that you tear down and you put a restaurant on it, we're gonna nail you.
I'm not looking for that.
Okay.
So just in general, comment on SDCs. This seems like the weapon that we still have in our arsenal as a city to control some things, in my opinion, and therefore I would assume that it's probably in the crosshairs of somebody sitting in Salem right now, trying to figure out a way that, because this is what comes up most often in conversations that I have about affordable housing is, oh, well, you're paying $29,000 or $30,000 off the top before you even break ground. And that's going to keep people from building houses. And part of me is like, yes, exactly, it will.
So I've got two trains of thought on that, and I'll be brief. One is, if you're not collecting that money from the developer that's developing the property, they're not going to turn around and charge less money for that house because they didn't pay the $29,000 for SDCs.
Absolutely.
They're just going to put that money in their pocket and move on to the next project. They're going to charge market rate for that house. That's a little simplified, but the reality is, on a micro scale, that's exactly what happens, right? So, waiving SDCs on one property isn't making the cost of that house any less. They're going to sell that house at market value, unless you've got some type of an agreement that, we'll waive SDCs or find some other way to pay for them if you agree to have like a lower rent or something, right? But short of any type of agreement, the market's going to set the price. The cost of the home is going to just dictate how much profit is in the home. The second point I'll make is that if you're not collecting that money from the development when it's done at that time, that money that you don't collect then has to come from somewhere, and typically that's going to come from utility ratepayers, which means that everybody who's already living in the community and already paying utility bills is going to have to pay a higher utility bill, because now that money has to come to pay for the treatment plant, the new treatment plant, all those expenses. They still have to be paid for, right? The loan we took out to upsize the sewer lagoons, we still have debt on that. We have a bond we have to pay for every single year. And if we're not collecting SDCs to help pay for that, we have to raise utility rates to pay for that. So yes, the developer's paying that money, which in turn the homeowner is paying for that home or that business, whatever it is, but that's money the utility ratepayers aren't having to pay, which for utility ratepayers is a good thing. So there's a balance there. Lower SDCs typically mean higher utility rates.
The comment when I discussed SDCs with Jim, the comment he made was that states that have sales tax do not have SDCs. But I don't think sales tax or the possibility of sales tax is real popular in this state. Let's see, one other comment about SDCs. I think they are generally not suitable for street improvements because they pay for system expansion. Now, I'm going to pick on Chris here because I think there is some leeway. For example, if you're improving a street, perhaps that does not have a stormwater drainage system, that could be a system expansion.
Yeah, there's some state law there, and there's maybe a little bit of gray area, but most of the gray area is going to be defined in your SDC methodology. It's going to identify projects that you can use the funds for. Those projects are going to be from the capital project list and the master plan. So, but primarily you're right. You're looking at expansion of the system. So where there's no sidewalks today, you're adding sidewalks. Where there's no fire hydrants today, you're adding fire hydrants, that type of thing. So you are looking at expansion of the existing system, not just maintenance, and not replacement is the big one, right? So you're not replacing a sewer line with a new sewer line using SDCs for that. That's not appropriate. The existing utility payers that are using that utility water line, for example, would be replacing that water line with like kind out of utility payments, not out of SDCs. So it's not maintenance and it's not replacement. It's expansion of the system of some sort.
Okay. Now, on that note, I'd like to move into.
I have a question.
Questions.
No,
Just point out now.
Oh, well, the two things on that comment is, I think that is an important piece. I mean, I agree with what you're saying, anything can change, but the methodology that Chris was talking about, you need to keep up on that to make sure you're getting the numbers right, and so reevaluating that on whatever regular basis is important. The other thing, and it might be as much of a question, because by what you said, Chris, I might have misunderstood, but at least there used to be a reimbursement component and an expansion component. Is there not the reimbursement anymore?
There is for water and for sewer,
But not for streets.
not for street, not for storm, and not for park.
All right.
Thanks. That was my question too.
Okay. And as Mike explained to me earlier today, reimbursement is for what the city has already built. And the developer is reimbursing the city. And improvement is for new stuff. Okay. Other questions? No? Okay, so let's move into LIDs. LIDs are unpopular, and
I disagree wholeheartedly.
we clearly established that. And they're unpopular because of the individual cost burden. They can be initiated by residents or business owners, which we saw on Landmark Drive, and I believe it's been pretty successful. Perhaps some complaints, but not too many.
I haven't seen the assessments yet, but they saw the
they haven't seen the
estimates.
assessments, okay. And I did want to, because the infill development creates its own set of issues, it was important for me to understand how development normally works, that the builder comes in with his plans and homes. For homes, he pays the SDCs and he puts in the infrastructure, and those costs are recovered in the cost of the homes, or if it's a rental property, in the rental income. Now, what happens with the infill areas, to avoid the problem of having checkerboard streets, the developer pays the SDCs and may have a non-remonstrance agreement with the city, which means that he or she can go ahead and build her buildings. But if an LID is established, they agree not to remonstrate against the LID. Now, remonstrate means to make a forcefully reproachful protest. I think that's a great definition. I think it's quite accurate too. And the actual period of non-remonstrance is the public hearing for the LID, which, as we who experienced in the North 11th Street LID proposal, felt that left ample opportunity to remonstrate outside of the hearing, which made it a very painful process. So generally, that's how development typically works. And if no LID is ever formed, the non-remonstrance agreement has no force or effect.
Expires.
Well, it also expires after 15 years, but if there's no LID, it doesn't have any effect.
I'll be an old man by then.
You'll be an old man driving down Chip and Seal North 12th Street.
Okay. The other thing I think it's important to appreciate is a couple of things, actually. When I first learned about LIDs, and specifically the 11th Street LID, Joan Swanson was still here, and I talked to her about various things, and I said, you know, how often does the city use these things anyway? And she said, well, they were kind of a big deal in the 80s. Mm-hmm. Well, the 80s are 40 years ago. You know, things were cheaper then. And so, in my opinion, the opportunity for LIDs initiated by the city has come and gone. I think the costs are too expensive, and the areas to be improved are typically lower income, lower value areas, which cause a lot of problems on North 11th Street. So I don't think, unless they are initiated by the business or the homeowners, I'm not sure it's really a viable option. Now, a couple of other alternatives and thoughts. We heard several times throughout the discussion of North 11th Street that, oh my God, the city has 40 or 50 unimproved streets. You know, it's like, we're not going to use LIDs on all of those streets, and not all of those streets are important. Our priority is to bring up to the city standards. In fact, I'm aware of 3 streets that could or could have been possible candidates for LIDs: 11th, North 11th, North 12th, and possibly 16th. So those are kind of my thoughts about LIDs. Just going back to the cost impact for a moment. There were 15 properties that were involved in North 11th Street. And the sidewalk cost alone, ignoring the rest of the street improvement, averaged 4.3% of the assessed value of those properties. So you can imagine what the full street improvement cost. In the worst case scenario, based on linear frontage, I believe it was 20 to 25%. Now, for many people, their home is their primary asset. And it seems incredibly unfair for the city to step in and ask you to pay 10 or 15 or 20% of your home so that we can upgrade the street. Yes, the upgrade will probably increase the value of your home, but I'm not sure it will increase it to a point where you can actually recoup that cost. So that's my problem with LIDs. Now, LIDs do solve the problem of upgrading or creating a benefit for a very localized group of properties, which, you know, how many of us drive down North 12th Street? I know you do. But the rest of us do when we're on assignment for the city, but otherwise not. So one alternative, a couple of alternatives that Chris and I have talked about. One is to limit LIDs to the cost of the sidewalks, which homeowners are now required to pay for anyway. This would assure that the sidewalks would get put in, they would be uniform, and and the city could place a lien on the homeowner for the cost of the sidewalks. Yes.
In reference to that, this probably doesn't make sense, but I suppose what happens is physically when something like that is done, like the city does the work and then like a lien is put on the property. Is that correct?
Mhm.
And what, do they pay interest?
Yes.
And is there a way, so in that respect, is there a way not to charge interest? Is there anything that you can do with that if their cost is 5,000 or it's 10,000, that, they can stretch it over 15 years or something like that and not pay any interest in the meantime, or something like that? Do you have any wherewithal to do that sort of thing?
The city council has full discretion on terms of repayment and what that would look like.
I mean,
Absolutely.
I assume you'd have to do the same for everybody, but I mean, you couldn't do, you could have 15 years, but you only get 10 years or that sort of thing.
Yeah, within the LID, it would be the same, but different LIDs could have different payback arrangements.
Okay, so there is a little tweaking there you could do with it.
Well, and some people have talked about the possibility of making the payment due if there's a ownership change, for example. So,
Yeah, that
you know,
makes sense.
oh, you owe $40,000 for the street improvement, but you don't actually have to pay it unless you sell your house.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
that comes out of escrow or whatever as, as
No,
a normal part of your
that's
settlement or whatever.
That's the same cost, yeah, that's good. I like that.
Yeah, in fact, the trigger would be if you didn't make the payment right away, if you were going to a payment of some sort, then that's what the lien would do, right? We would place a lien on the property and then that lien could be payable at the time of sale. One option would be that you wouldn't make that payment due at the time of sale and you would allow the new property owner to then take on that debt and have that same payment schedule, right? So that would be another option to alleviate some type of burden on existing property owners. You just have to fully disclose that at the time of sale of the property, right? So again, I think the code doesn't dictate any real specific parameters around the repayment of that assessment. And I think that that's a good thing because it allows the city council a lot of flexibility depending on the situation, whether it be more residential or more industrial or more commercial, you're going to have different needs. And the neighborhood or the affected area is going to have different needs. So that flexibility, I think, is a good thing that the LID provides for.
Yes.
Just for clarity and for time, are we trying to answer the questions on the last slide, or like what is our objective tonight?
What I would like to do tonight is to just walk through all of these options because, and get your input. I don't know that we're going to get to a point where we can wrap this up as a nice package with a bow on it. If we do, that would be great.
Okay. I guess just for time, and I'm not trying to, but just Matt, I guess, are there any in here that you feel like you don't understand? Because I don't know if I feel like I understand what a separate road district is, what a general obligation bond is, what the local gas taxes, how PLTs work. So I just don't know if we need to walk through them all individually, unless if there's specific things you want to call out on them.
I think there are some things I want to call out. And I also hope to learn from you things that you know that I don't know.
Okay. Turnabout. Haha.
A lot of pressure.
Okay, another option that Chris proposed was instead of non-remonstrance agreements to use something called a development agreement. And a non-remonstrance agreement could be thought of a very narrow version of a development agreement, as I understand it. You have to fill in here where I'm wrong. But a development agreement would be a broader agreement with somebody, particularly for infill development, that would outline what they have to pay, when they have to pay it, rather than just limiting the requirement to non-remonstrance, which we saw could be of very little value. So do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's still going to be some provisions around the development agreement, but in essence, yeah, it wouldn't only be triggered by the formation of a local improvement district. So if you think of it as you have a development agreement in place that specifies what you're going to be required to help pay for. If the city were to get a grant and do a portion of the road, they may come to you and say, hey, we're doing the improvement, it's time for you to now do it. You'd still have a due process to go through an assessment and a review and all of that, but it wouldn't be limited to the formation of a local improvement district. It could be a grant, could be a bond, could be anything that triggered development of that street would then trigger the development agreement to take effect, to take hold. So again, there'd still be some due process to notify and have an opportunity to have a hearing, but it's not limited to the formation of a local improvement district, which is specific to assessing all the properties. Yeah, I think that's in short.
So in a scenario like that, could it be part of the agreement that the property owner is like paying into a fund or whatever? Instead of just like, oh yeah, when we eventually do this, you're gonna have to write us a check for 20 grand. Could it be that they're paying something?
Yeah, in fact, that'd be one of the benefits, which you would say, well, rather than doing the street improvements at this time, which is required by development, we'll have a development agreement with you and you're gonna agree to pay X amount of dollars every year until X amount, until the whatever amount is paid for. So you could do a one lump sum payment in lieu of, right? Like in lieu of doing street improvements, pay this amount today and you're done with your street improvements. You've met your obligation. Take that same dollar amount, spread it out over 5 years or 10 years and say, make this payment every year until that much is paid in and then you're done. The nice part about that is then as a property owner, you're paying for that street improvement, whether it happens now or it happens later. So you've kind of incentivized the property and say, well, let's get the street done now because I'm already paying for it. I might as well get the improvement now. And so you actually get some advocates for wanting those street improvements to take place, as opposed to everybody just saying, if I can delay this thing out 15 years, I don't have to pay anything. I'm just going to kick against it every time it comes up and never have to do it as long as I can wait it out 15 years. A development agreement would kind of turn that on its head. You'd have people advocating for the improvements because they were already helping pay for them. So just to take 12th Street as an example, if we start to implement that plan right now and say there's like 15 properties that are paying money into this fund, could we use that money to do the improvement on 11th Street? And then like on 24th Street, they're going to be somebody paying money on 24th Street. And then eventually we would use that money to do 12th Street and like just paying. So you could use the money today and get the value out of it today rather than like segregating it and knowing that the costs are going to go up, 80% between now and when we actually do it. Yeah, I mean, dollars and cents wise, it's all going to be accounted for, right? I mean, it's all going to go into the local government investment pool and it's going to sit there and it's going to gain interest and we're going to spend it. That specific dollar could pay for any number of things, right? But it'll still be accounted for. It'll be accounted for as your payment towards the street improvements. And when those street improvements take place and whether that dollar pays for another project today, and it's kind of moot. I mean, the point is it'll be accounted for as your payment, your contribution towards the street improvements, which are required for the development that you did, right? Yeah.
Gotcha.
I like the idea. I guess the only question I would have in terms of making that agreement, that's something that the city could do, at the time that the person comes in and submits plans for the development. And you say, well, you have to sign this, and then we'll give you the permit, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So that's how that would work. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, you'd say, make the improvements today as required, or sign a non-remonstrance agreement, which says, well, if we do an LID within 15 years, you have to do it, or do a payment in lieu of, pay this amount today, and you don't have to pay anything else in the future, or pay this amount over the next 5 years, 10 years, whatever was decided. In multiple of the cases, you're going to still have the lien on the property, right? So you got to secure it in some way. So you're still going to have them agree to have the lien on the property, put the city in a position where if you default or you sell the property, whatever, the city's going to be able to get that money out, get paid for it. But the whole idea is you're looking for alternative ways to help development take place without that heavy upfront cost to the property owner, right? And so, if you're looking to be development friendly, then these are options you look at. If you're looking to not be development friendly and try to hinder development and growth in certain areas, then you would not extend those options. You would say, we want full street improvements, right? That's what the code says. So it just depends on what the attitude of the council and the planning commission and the city in general is towards that development.
Would you have to give them the option of a non-remonstrance agreement?
No, the city code says the city may offer that. And then there's specific provisions that have to be met in order for the city to offer that. But at no time is the city required to offer a non-remonstrance
Unless
agreement.
your name is Knudsen, and then you are obligated to offer them one.
Okay, let's not name names here. All right, urban renewal district.
Another one, I should say.
Yeah.
I'm just going to mention urban renewal districts briefly. The city has used an urban renewal district to improve the infrastructure on Main and Applegate in anticipation of the Streetscapes project. In order for this to really work, other tax-paying or tax-receiving entities have to approve it. And there has to be an indication of growth or expanded commerce. And I think from my perspective, with respect to street improvements, the only area that might make sense for an additional urban renewal district would be the extension of the industrial area in 13th connecting out to 19th, which I'm sure the residents of 12th Street would hate, and probably those on 13th as well. But in any case, that would be an obvious area where the city could expand to allow additional industrial growth. That's it.
My comment on that would be, I would think that because of the jurisdictions that the money is taken away from, I'm involved with the fire district, and every year during their budget thing, they talk about how much they're losing because of the urban renewal district. And I think it would behoove the city not to start another one at any point until this one that's downtown or on Main Street is
Sunsets.
sunset.
Yeah.
That's just my perspective.
No,
Yeah.
that's,
You've got to be able to show the other taxing district that there's going to an end game benefit for them, right? And that they're going to be able to survive the next several years while that urban renewal district's in place until it's paid off, that they're able to forego that increased projected revenue until it's completed. And at the end of the day, the tax revenue coming into that district is going to be higher than what it would be if it just was not implemented and just kind of continued at 3% per year. So there's some convincing. It has to make sense. If you're reliant solely on a 3% tax assessment increase per year for the area, I don't think you're going to get a lot of thumbs up. I think it's really tough to bank off of just that 3%. So what you're really looking at is areas that without that additional investment wouldn't see anything more than just that 3%, but with that investment are going to see something much greater than that, right? Like in the double digits or more, where you're going to see substantial investment into the area, substantial increase in property values, which benefits all those property owners. And at the end of the day, when the renewal is gone, then that's added tax revenue that goes to the school district, the fire district, the library, the city, everybody. So it's a bit of a tough sell, but in specific locations, it's a great tool, right? It's got to be the right location, and then that's got to be the tool that you kind of look to, but it's not right for every location, absolutely not.
Okay. Separate road districts, this is obviously not a revenue source. I just wanted to comment briefly, there are actually 13 road districts in Benton County. And I think this suffers from the same issue that local improvement districts do, except in reverse, because the revenue generated by the additional tax on the road district is not really enough to expand or maintain the road.
Correct. Yeah, I live on mine, and yes, they don't. They're not maintained.
So,
2 weekends out of the year with a hot patch is what it gets you.
Yep.
so like,
July, August.
from my perspective, what's the point? But yes.
Just logistically, how does that is there just the one in Paloma?
Yes.
When they need maintenance on that, do they contract with us or do they contract with some private?
Yes.
Okay,
Private.
okay.
We don't have road district personnel or equipment, really. We contract out as well.
Oh, okay.
So typically we get the same contractors that the city uses when they're doing some city project. Then we're just like, hey, just swing down this road and do this 300 feet while you're at it, kind of thing.
Okay. General obligation bonds, as we've discussed in the past, the city does have a go bond for the sewer lagoons, which won't expire until the mid to late 30s, sometime in the 30s. And I don't think this is a viable option because we have a significant bond coming before us next month from the county, which I hope passes, which the council has supported. But I don't think the public is going to be favorably disposed toward additional bond measures for some time to come. The next item is a local gasoline taxes does require voter approval, and there probably will be industry groups representing gasoline station owners that will be opposed to this. When I looked at this last year, I looked at numbers based on Eugene, Sandy, Tillamook, and Springfield, all of which have gasoline taxes ranging from 1 to 5 cents per gallon. It's not a lot of revenue depending on how much the tax is. You could also look at it as penalizing those who don't feel they can afford electric cars. Or perhaps encouraging those to move toward electric cars that can't afford them. Jim Brewer thought it might be worthwhile to consider a tri-county gasoline tax with Lynn, Benton, and Lincoln County. However, I find that gas prices already vary dramatically among those counties, and it's incredibly expensive on the coast. The gas you get on the coast must be really wonderful because it's quite expensive.
Go ahead.
I feel like the gas in Newport is often cheaper than the gas here.
Really?
Yeah.
It seems to me like it's
I was
higher.
curious about that. Also, we don't really have any power over a tri-county thing. Why is Jim Brewer recommending that to us?
He thought it might be easier to go for it on a broader area than to just have one city do it.
Sure.
However, I think in our particular case, since we have a highway going through a city, I think that people would be pretty happy to gouge all those tourists. Not gouge them, but
That's on the
Yes.
record.
generate
To collect
revenue.
some kind of
Collect
revenue
some type
from
of-
people who don't pay for street
Right,
use
right.
anyway.
Yes,
And-
exactly.
I also have I feel like the Lynn County Commission wouldn't go for that, but it's not really.
Yes.
I really want to pursue this. I
Okay.
think that you can sell it to the voters just based on what you just said.
It's in the strategic plan for next year, not this year, but next year. So it is something we'll take a closer look at. Just not going to happen within the next 12 months.
I think I would like to see it on the 2024 ballot, which I'm sure is what you're talking about.
To have a local gas tax.
Yes. You know, Jim's feeling is that it just encourages people to drive on the safe way to get their gas. But I'm not sure that's really the case. I think people who buy gas here are probably going to continue to buy gas here if it's 3 cents more a gallon.
They do currently.
But
He really does. I think more to the point that the way gas prices have just been doing this for the last
yeah,
year and a half, you could put a 10 cents a gallon tax on there and no one would even.
yeah.
But
I wouldn't go that high, but maybe 5.
Let's just do $1. I didn't, that was a joke.
I'm going to put that on your campaign poster.
The recording.
Yeah.
Okay, transient lodging taxes. As all of you know, this is to date not much money to speak of. At least 70% of it has to be used to fund tourism-related activities. Currently, we allocate all of it to tourist-related activities. And I don't know what the projection is for these revenues when the RV park opens up. Have we
We
calculated?
looked at it, and there was a pretty wide range. And some of that was dependent upon the current business model of the owner, the developer. I could pull those numbers out again, but off the top of my head, I think the range was somewhere between like $25,000 up to like $80,000 a year, just depending on vacancy and what percentage are vacated on a nightly basis versus how many of them are long-term stays, short-term stays. Yeah, so there's quite a bit of fluctuation built into the model that I did, but I do have that model built and we could look at it. But you know, even at the low end at $20,000, $25,000 a year for 175 unit RV and plus the current motel and some Airbnbs that we sprinkled in, that's more than we're collecting right now. So
It is. It is.
Didn't you say so much of it has to be used on tourism?
70%.
So if you had 25, 20 of it's got to go for tourism, not streets.
right. But tourism could include some lighting, could provide directional signage, could provide
Signage,
some
yeah.
things that are kind of street related.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Okay. Let's see. The next item is grants and loans. And I think at this particular point in time, we have an availability of loans that we probably have not had in the past. I mean, grants and loans that we may not have had in the past and won't have in the future because the bipartisan infrastructure bill. So, for example, I'm hoping that we could pursue a grant to cover the improvements on South 16th Street, the roundabout on 19th, and to do so within the Safe Routes for All program. So I think there is an opportunity to go after some of these dollars and fund some of those projects.
I think we would have a little bit deeper discussion about this because it's not clear to me that we as a city will have access to all those pots of money. And because the DOT is having a hard time maintaining the exchange program that they had heretofore worked out so that counties and cities could access those funds through DOT rather because we don't have the paperwork to access them directly from the feds. And so even all those grant programs sound like they're just dialed in for Philomath, but I don't know that we actually can access most of those funds because we don't have the paperwork to do it. And it's exorbitantly expensive to get certified and maintain certification.
That's
that's a statewide issue, and there's some administrative fixes and some legislative fixes that are being proposed to look at that issue. But they're not going anywhere. It's really an ODOT issue that's affecting all of us, and it's a policy change at ODOT. And
Well, I got a 10-minute speech in my pocket about this if you want me to go.
But
Actually, I would.
your point's well taken, though, that we do need to look at grants and loans. We need to look at what's available, what we can apply for. I think we need to do it. But again, I always come back to, we need to focus on what projects do we have out there, and then matching a grant and a loan to that project. I mean, my inbox gets filled every week with, apply for this grant, try to get this. And I could spend all day just applying for grants, but if I don't have projects to tie them to, I'm just creating a lot of busy work. And so I think a better way to go about it is to say, we have this street project in our capital improvement plan. What's the funding source that we can look at to go in that direction? Because frankly, I don't have a trail in our park trail. We don't have a trail in the CIP that I could follow after and get a trail grant for today. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time looking for one, right? And so the same thing goes with the streets. Is you got to find the street project, and then you try to find the grants and or loans that are going to help you pay for it.
Yeah, I think half of this problem is funding sources, and the other half is prioritizing projects and determining which projects are a priority, particularly with respect to increased utility fees. We could increase utility fees just to cover street improvements, or we could identify specific projects and the associated costs and increase the utility fees for a temporary period until those costs were covered, sort of as we did with the city fee to increase our reserves. So that's an approach we could take. But I think, to Chris's point, it is really important that we identify the priority projects. And the one that always comes to mind for me is North 9th Street, because it's narrow and hazardous. And there are certainly other areas. I think the areas around the school are critically important. And obviously through our recent study, we have some additional information and thought wrapped around those. So I think it's not only viable funding sources, but also how you're going to spend it, because it makes that funding that much more compelling.
So there's a couple more things about the grants and loans. So we're also, keep in mind, we want to prioritize our stuff, but then we always have to go to someone bigger and fit into their priority scheme also. So we need to keep that in mind. I'm not suggesting that we try and scheme the system so you can chase your tail a lot doing that, but just to keep in mind that if there's not a mechanism for us to get money directly as a city, then we're going to have to, you can't put it any other way, we're going to have to beat out every other city in our region with a project in order to get those project funds. Does that make sense what I'm saying? So even though we think it's super important that 9th Street gets developed because there's a chance that someone's going to get hurt there, even though no one has, that may not rise to the priority level. If we have to go to Campo, for example, they might be like, oh, show us the accident. Oh, there isn't any? Okay, let's move on, right? So,
yeah.
Well, because there's an intersection that is having accidents that's within the region, right? That we as a region should be allocating funds to.
Right. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying keep that in mind when you're prioritizing your stuff.
Yeah, I think the citywide levy has the same problem that the GO bonds do. I don't think the voters, particularly in these inflationary periods, are really going to be anxious about paying for a levy.
I have one thing to add to your list. One of the things we used to do, and then it kind of goes along with what Chris was talking about, having that list we had produced, this would have been in the mid-90s, we produced a list of projects, probably directly right out of the capital improvement plan that we had, but that identified projects, as you guys have talked about, and exactly where they were and whatnot. And when the developer came along, we would say, it would start at the staff level. They would say, okay, this is, in your particular area, we need these things done too. And your project's big enough, you need to help us with that. And we actually got some cooperation with that. Pioneer Street,
Yeah,
from 7th to 9th, was done by Starlight Village at no cost to the city. And it wasn't done with SDCs, they just did it on top of what they were already doing. Now, yes, that's 25 years ago, and the prices and the costs and all that, I understand that, but I wanted to point that out, that there is potential in that, and then what you do is you sort of get their agreement, okay, we'll add that in there, and when you go to the planning commission, you put that as a condition of approval, and you could get a few things done, some things done by doing that, if you do it somewhat aggressively. I would say that we probably were kind of aggressive about it. And like I say, up front, like the city manager, the planning person, that's, on the top of their list when they start out. Okay, we need this too,
Yeah.
to, help get the buy-in, I guess you could say. So I see that as a source of, but it is obviously totally dependent on what kind of developments going in, but just as a note, I guess I could say, if that was, I liked all these ideas, I guess while I'm talking, I like a lot of these ideas. I tend to agree with most of the different thoughts that you guys had on them. I do see the SDCs. On the LID, I think I guess I wouldn't totally throw that in the trash can, but I think of non-remonstrances, yeah, probably a lot of them that are out there was done during my time, or even back into the 80s, like you were saying, and their value is questionable at best. But I think keeping a lot of these as options or pieces of options probably is a good idea too. Not just, trash can a bunch of them necessarily. But yeah, maybe a transient tax, maybe, well, I'd only get $25,000, but hey, if you could put $25,000 into that pool to do street improvements, that's 25,000 more than you had.
Yeah.
And if you did that with,
Two or
a
three
variety of
things,
things, I think that all makes sense. So I thank you for letting me participate, and I'll probably send you a note, just kind of finalize my thoughts.
Just one more thing on the non-remonstrances, if you'll give me a second. I had flagged a lot on North 12th Street 15 years ago in May. And I think that the non-remonstrance agreement that I signed is still in effect, but is going to expire in May. But I noticed in the newsletter that we just started doing that property is now requesting some land use decision or whatever from the planning commission. I just think it's funny that there's been a non-remonstrance agreement in place for that property for 15 years. They're continuing to do development, yet we still don't have any street improvements or any money to go towards it. It's just kind of funny to me.
Well, I think there are probably a number of streets in town where if I were to develop a property, I would probably bet that the street would never be improved in 15 years because they're just not a priority. But who knows? So in conclusion, I think the sources that are most available, we can acknowledge the existing sources of tax revenues and SDCs that we have to use, the possibility of gas tax, increased transient lodging taxes, grants and loans, and increasing utility fees. Those 6 sources seem to me to be the viable ones. And the other portion of this discussion then is to prioritize the projects, the street improvement projects that are most important, and figure out what barriers there are. For example, with North Montgomery Street, what's the county's position and how can we get money from them? So that's where I'm inclined to leave it for tonight. What next steps do you have in mind?
Christopher has a comment.
Yes.
I just guess I wanted to chat, like, I understand the problems with LIDs. I do think we should keep them in mind. Like, I think Landmark Drive is a good example. Like, they can work really well when they work as intended. I think us coming in and trying to make them work is not good, but when people want them, I think we should use them. So as they weren't included on your list, I just want to make sure I put that.
I wasn't eliminating them, but it's like.
Yes. But yeah, I mean, I also, for system development charges, there's a lot of different things said there. I think I guess I don't personally see, and I would be curious if I'm wrong, but it doesn't seem like there's a lack of desire to build new housing in Philomath from developers. Like, it's not like we, are rezoning land or have land that is ready for housing and no one wants to do anything with it. It seems like, so I feel like our SDCs aren't creating a barrier to development as they are. That being said, I would be open to us considering a way to, like, I think as Chris mentioned, lower or waive SDCs in exchange for certain guarantees. Like if we are going to have some type of actually like affordable housing or something, then we're trying to lower SDCs for that. But for just market rate housing, we seem to be attracting plenty of development with our current SDCs. So I don't see any, I feel good about that for market rate housing. So I just wanted that. I've been sitting here. I thought I should say something. And now I'm done.
Well, that's a good point. And actually, I wasn't able to dig it up. But Jim said the League of Oregon Cities put together a pie chart on the cost of development, and SDCs, even though they're complained about a lot, are not really huge.
Yeah, and I know like other cities have, and I don't, we're not big enough. I don't know if we have the money to do this, but like have put just a little bit of general fund into a fund to pay for like SDC waivers for like affordable housing and stuff. So it's like something they budget for. Mm-hmm. Those are larger cities that, have more development, but just to say, like, it's not a crazy idea to think about, creating a specific instance where in exchange for guarantees of affordability and other things the city might want, you could waive or lower the SDCs. So, yeah.
Well, it wasn't even more than 10 years ago, and cities were abandoning that because they were trying to recruit developers to their cities. Like, we need housing, there's no housing. And so it was competitive. I mean, the cities were looking to attract development by reducing costs, reducing fees, all those things. That game has kind of gone by the wayside. Right. People still need housing, but it's like everybody needs housing, right? It's not like there's certain communities getting left out that aren't needing housing. Everybody needs housing. And so it's made that market much more competitive, and there's less need to have to waive SDCs than what there were. I just want to make one final comment. I appreciate the last bullet point on here. Appropriate funding method varies by project. I do think it wasn't that long ago that there seemed to be an effort for the city to create a policy on which funding source we're going to use to do street improvements for local streets. And I talked a lot about the importance of having all of these different tools in our toolbox that we can go to, and it really is project specific. I felt like I was frankly kind of mocked at the time for saying that, and it was like, no, we have to have a policy on what we're going to do. Obviously, there's a best way to fund this. We just need to set a policy and follow it. And there's obviously bad ways of doing it. We just need to eliminate those. And again, in certain instances, some of these tools are going to be more effective than others. And I think it's important to keep as many tools in the toolbox as possible. And then depending on the project, you find the best tool that's going to work for you, right? And how to determine that best tool isn't by policy. That determine the best tool is by relying on your staff, the neighborhood, the council, and coming together and talking about different issues and coming to what is the best tool to be done. Those are just conversations. That's not set by policy, because you can't set policy for everything. There's too many variables that go into it. There's too many conditions. So I really appreciate that last bullet point. It kind of puts an exclamation point on what I feel like I've been saying for the last 2 years, and not everybody was listening. So it is good to have different tools and different things available to us. And right now our code allows for a very wide array of different tools that the city can utilize to make improvements to the local streets. And it's important that we make those. In some areas, it's more important than others, right? There are neighborhoods that probably will never get a paved street, right? Because they service 3 houses. There's others that are unimproved that need to be improved. I point to 16th Street. That's one that should have probably improved 20 years ago, right? But it just never has. We're addressing it now, right? And so I can't say why it didn't get done 10 or 20 years ago, but I can say the city is taking very proactive steps right now so that unimproved street right in front of the elementary school can be improved and be made much safer than what it is today. So there are a lot of things that the city's doing today, regardless of how things used to get done, that are still very positive. And I think that the committee and the city council should be commended for that, because we are very proactive. We do have a very aggressive capital improvement plan. We've got an updated transportation system plan. So we've taken a lot of steps to lay out where the needs are, how we're going to fund those needs. And I think we're making a lot of progress outside of, I'm going to get hate mail for this, outside of the highway. Most of the city streets are in really good shape. I mean, I challenge you to go and drive any of the side streets and find a bunch of potholes and horrible areas. I mean, there's a few, I'm not saying there aren't any, but for the most part, for a city our size, our streets are in really good shape. Very, very few horrible areas. There's a few streets that still need to be improved. We're working on those. Those are all on our list. We know about them. We're working on them. We have a plan to address them. Just can't do everything at once. So I think it's commendable, the position the city's in and the steps that we're taking. When the streetscape project is done, 16th Street's done. There's some improvements on 11th Street, which will help. Again, we'll be hard pressed, I think, to find those little areas in town that could really still use some improvement. North 12th Street is probably the biggest one that's still going to stand out there. And it's all residential. And there's going to be a lot of political maneuvering to see if that ever gets improved or not. And it'll be a conversation between the residents on North 12th Street and the city council on, at what point does safety and all of those other factors that come with improved streets outweigh the cost, which is going to be there. So that's a bigger discussion, but overall, I just think the city needs to recognize we're in a pretty commendable position right now and doing well. Noting the exception on Highway 20, Highway 34, which we're addressing, right? We're spending a lot of city money to pay for a highway project that we don't maintain and operate, right? That's very commendable to the city that we're taking proactive steps. So I'll end on that. We're doing a good job.
I might fall in a hole
I got the number for ODOT for you.
Just a question for SDCs. Is there anyone else that charges SDCs? Like, does the fire district charge SDCs?
No, it's limited to cities.
Okay.
Some communities will charge what's called an impact fee.
Okay.
There's other names for them as well. But typically those are still collected by the city on behalf of like the fire district or the school district. School district impact fees are fairly common now, fire district as well. If the districts were to come to the city, that'd be a discussion to have. If we wanted to charge in addition to the SDCs, if we wanted to charge initial impact fee that could then go to the fire district or the school district, for example. Those are fairly common. I don't know, fairly. They're not uncommon.
Okay.
I wouldn't even give a number. It's less than half cities probably have them. More common in larger cities for sure than in smaller cities.
Yes.
One more question about the SDCs. I know we just did a review and set the fees, but is there any like rule as to what we have to set those fees at?
Mm-hmm. There is, and there isn't. There are rules that determine your method. You have to have a methodology.
Right.
And I don't remember the exact
You have to have,
language.
like, a
The
plot,
methodology
a goal or
has to,
whatever,
the
right?
methodology has to be sound, right? It has to be, you have to have a method for what you're calculating for. There is some state law on what you can use, what you can't utilize. But then once that's there, the city council has discretion. You want to collect 90% of those? You want to collect 0% of those, right? I mean, you could have the fees adopted and just agree to have a policy that we're not going to collect STCs for the next 18 months. Go and see if you can spur some development. I mean, that was a game that was played 10 years ago. It's just like, we're going to waive STCs for a year. So get your applications in now, because a year from now, the cost of building on that lot just went up $20,000, right? So the council has some discretion there, but as far as the methodology itself goes, there is some state law that we have to follow. There's procedures we have to go through. You have to identify what what projects it can be used for. So there are guidelines. You can't. It's not Wild West where
We can't just say, oh, it's going to be $25,000 for you for street SDCs.
No, it's got to be based on something.
Right.
Yeah, it's got to be based. Typically, you're basing on for reimbursement, you're basing on your current value of all your current assets, right? And then for the improvement, then it's going to be based on whatever future improvement projects, a list of projects that need to be done at some point in the future. And then you'll calculate reimbursement on both of those. Yeah.
Okay, what I'd like to suggest two things. I'd like to summarize the pros and cons that we've discussed here tonight, and what the sources that we would advocate for street fees, and perhaps the changes to LIDs. And then I'd like to get together with you and put together a list of priority projects. Bring it back to this committee to approve before we go to council. How does that sound?
Sure.
Okay, the other thing I need to ask you about is, I know that Kevin wanted us to weigh in on I believe, a vendor that we're going to be using for one of our projects. So I don't know when that needs to be addressed, but the time of these meetings, I know, are a challenge for our city staff, because they start pretty late, but I know they're also a challenge for our working council members. So I'll be checking with you every meeting to see if you want to continue to meet at 7 on whatever date this is, the first Tuesday of the month. Or if you can change that time. So I guess first question for Kevin appears to be awake. Have you muted him?
Nope, he's there.
He's there.
Your words are covering them up. Maybe you can see what's there. Oh, okay.
So Kevin, when do we need to discuss the contractor issue? Do you know what I'm talking about? Because I obviously don't.
No.
She's referring to some of the specifics for the engineering for the treatment plant. The Public Works Committee was assigned to weigh in on some of that.
Oh, the discussions on
Filtration.
the filtration portion in the programming. That's not for quite a while yet.
Oh, okay. Well, if that's the case, Well, our next meeting could probably be relatively brief, I would think, if this is the only issue we're discussing. I'm not sure what else unless we have other tree board.
And I can work with you and Kevin on the data a little bit. Part of the issue with this day like today is we've got to get minutes put out and into the packet, which goes out tomorrow. So it's a pretty quick turnaround for minutes for the meeting. And then it's kind of long to wait till next month, especially when some of the minutes are on the CIP, which will be in the packet tomorrow. So it's a little bit quick turnaround. So that the first week of the month is a difficult one to have committee meetings on. Better to shoot for, second or third and give some time for staff turnaround on direction that we get in these meetings. But we can work on that offline. We'll find a date. Look at a couple other dates.
Okay, well, I hope this was helpful to you. I know you already know a lot about these things, but there's always something that you can learn and things I can learn from you guys too.
I wanted to say something to Gary before we left, so go ahead.
Okay.
Hey, Gary. I saw people out on North 12th today. That was awesome. Thanks.
What were they doing?
Fixing some potholes on the city portion.
Oh, I noticed your potholes. I didn't see anything, but I noticed those potholes. Okay. With that, I'd like to adjourn our meeting for this evening and look forward to seeing you all next time.
Awesome.
Oh.
There we go.
Right.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you. Good night.